I never expected a simple trip to the mailbox would turn our quiet suburban life upside down. But that's exactly what happened last Tuesday when Patricia Wilkins, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, crossed a line with my 15-year-old daughter. What she didn't realize was that tangling with Sheriff Howard Collins' family would be the biggest mistake of her HOA career. The morning started like any other in Pinewood Estates, our peaceful community in Fairfield County, Connecticut. I'd moved here with my daughter Olivia and my wife Rebecca after accepting the sheriff position 3 years ago. It was a good place to raise a family-safe neighborhoods, excellent schools, and a sense of community I hadn't experienced in my previous job in Hartford. "Dad, I'm going to grab the mail," Olivia called, already halfway out the door. I looked up from my laptop where I was reviewing department reports. "Thanks, honey. Be right back for breakfast." It was a cool April morning, the kind where spring hasn't fully committed but winter has mostly retreated. Our house sat midway down Oak Ridge Lane, a winding street lined with colonial-style homes, each with its own carefully manicured lawn, a requirement strictly enforced by the Pinewood Estates HOA. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I glanced at my watch, wondering what was taking Olivia so long. The community mailboxes were only a 2-minute walk. I was about to check when the front door burst open and Olivia stormed in, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment, clutching our mail in a tight grip. "What happened?" I asked, immediately on alert. "That horrible Mrs. Wilkins." Olivia exclaimed, throwing the mail onto the counter. She stopped me at the mailbox and started yelling about my hoodie, said it violated some stupid HOA dress code. I felt my jaw tighten. "What dress code, exactly?" Olivia said. She said residents aren't allowed to wear street clothes in common areas, called it unsightly, and took my picture with her phone. When I asked her to stop, she threatened to fine us. I examined my daughter's outfit, a simple navy hoodie with our high school logo, jeans, and sneakers. Nothing inappropriate or even remotely questionable. She said hoodies are against the rules because they encourage loitering and criminal behavior. Olivia continued, making air quotes. She demanded my name and our address. When I wouldn't give it, she followed me halfway home, taking more pictures. Rebecca came in from the kitchen, concern etched on her face. "What's all the commotion?" As Olivia recounted the story to her mother, I felt my professional calm being tested. In my 15 years in law enforcement, I'd developed a thick skin and level head, but something about a grown woman harassing my teenage daughter over a completely normal outfit struck a nerve. "I'm going to handle this," I said, reaching for my jacket. Rebecca gave me a knowing look. "Howard, please don't go over there in uniform. That'll just escalate things." She was right, of course. As the county sheriff, I needed to be careful about how I approached neighborhood disputes. The line between being a concerned parent and abusing my position was one I took seriously. "I'll change first," I agreed, "but this needs to be addressed." While Olivia tried to shake off the encounter over breakfast, I looked through our HOA handbook. As I suspected, there was no dress code for common areas. The closest thing was a vague clause about maintaining community standards of decorum in shared spaces, hardly grounds for harassing a teenager about a school hoodie. After changing into jeans and a button-down shirt, I kissed Rebecca goodbye and headed for my car. Patricia Wilkins lived 3 streets over in a house that had become infamous for its meticulously documented HOA violations, not ones she committed, but ones she reported. Her front window was strategically positioned to monitor the cul-de-sac, and neighbors joked that she had binoculars permanently attached to her face. I pulled up to her perfectly painted white colonial with its precisely trimmed boxwoods and took a deep breath. This wasn't my first encounter with Patricia. Since moving to Pinewood Estates, I'd witnessed her brand of neighborhood policing at community meetings, the snippy comments about lawn heights, the passive-aggressive notes about garbage cans left out too long, and the relentless campaign against a family who dared to paint their front door a shade of blue not on the approved color palette. Before I could ring the doorbell, the door swung open. Patricia stood there in a pink cardigan over a floral dress, her graying blonde hair cut in the classic "can I speak to the manager" style. Her thin lips were pressed into a disapproving line. "Sheriff Collins," she said, not sounding particularly surprised. "What brings you to my door? Is this official business?" Her eyes darted to my plain clothes and back to my face. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilkins," I said, keeping my tone professional. "I'd like to discuss an incident that occurred this morning involving my daughter." Her expression shifted subtly. "Your daughter? I'm afraid I don't understand." "My 15-year-old daughter, Olivia. You confronted her at the mailboxes about her hoodie and took photos of her without permission." Patricia's posture stiffened. "Oh, that was your daughter. Well, Sheriff, I was simply doing my duty as HOA Vice President. We have standards in this community." "Standards that don't exist in our bylaws," I countered. "There's no dress code for collecting mail, Mrs. Wilkins." "Perhaps not explicitly," she sniffed, "but Section 12, Paragraph 3 clearly states that residents must maintain appropriate community standards. Hoodies are associated with delinquency and create an unsavory atmosphere." I felt my patience wearing thin. "Mrs. Wilkins, my daughter was wearing her school hoodie. There's nothing unsavory about it. More importantly, you took photographs of a minor without parental consent, which is concerning." "I documented a violation," she insisted, "as is my right as a board member." "I'd like you to delete those photos immediately." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me, Sheriff? Because that would be an abuse of your position." "I'm asking as Olivia's father, not as the sheriff," I clarified. "And I'm informing you that approaching and photographing minors is inappropriate behavior that needs to stop. I'll have you know that I've already forwarded the images to the entire board as evidence," she said with a self-satisfied smile. "We'll be discussing potential fines at next week's meeting." That was when my professional demeanor began to crack. The thought of this woman distributing pictures of my daughter to others in the neighborhood without our consent crossed a line. "Mrs. Wilkins, I'm going to make this very clear. There is no violation. You harassed a teenage girl, took her photograph without permission, and are now distributing those images. If this continues, we won't be having this conversation as neighbors." Her face flushed. "Are you threatening me with your badge, Sheriff Collins?" "Because I have powerful friends in the county commissioner's office who would be very interested to hear about this." I took a step back, realizing this conversation wasn't going to be productive. "Please delete the photos, Mrs. Wilkins. That's all I'm asking." "I'll do no such thing," she huffed. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an HOA newsletter to finish." The door closed in my face and I stood there for a moment, trying to regain my composure. This wasn't over, but I needed to approach it differently. When I got home, Rebecca was at the kitchen table with her laptop open, already 3 steps ahead of me. "I've been looking at Connecticut privacy laws," she said without looking up. "Taking photos in public spaces is generally legal, but distributing images of minors without parental consent is murkier territory, especially if it could be construed as harassment." As an attorney specializing in family law, Rebecca's research skills were impeccable. "She claims she's forwarded the photos to the entire HOA board," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. "That changes things. Did she admit that to you directly?" "In those exact words," I confirmed. "Interesting." Rebecca tapped a few more keys. "You know, Howard, we've put up with the HOA's overzealous enforcement since moving here, but this crosses a line. It's time we look more closely at how this board operates." She wasn't wrong. In the 3 years we'd lived in Pinewood Estates, the HOA had become increasingly aggressive under Patricia's influence. What had started as typical suburban governance regulating fence heights and holiday decorations had evolved into something that felt like surveillance. "I'm going to email the HOA president," I decided. "Jason Thompson seems reasonable, maybe he can rein her in." Rebecca nodded. "Good first step, and I'll contact the other board members directly about the photos." That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Olivia seemed to have bounced back from the morning's confrontation. She was chatting animatedly about her upcoming science project when my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Jason Thompson, responding to my message about Patricia. I skimmed it quickly, my frown deepening with each sentence. "Everything okay, Dad?" Olivia asked, noticing my expression. "Just HOA stuff," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Nothing for you to worry about," but there was plenty to worry about. Jason's email was polite but dismissive. While he regretted any discomfort caused to my daughter, he fully supported Patricia's diligent enforcement of community standards. He mentioned nothing about the photographs, but did include an attachment, a newly drafted community appearance policy that explicitly prohibited hoodies, athletic wear, and casual attire that diminishes the prestigious character of Pinewood estates in common areas. The policy was dated that very day, clearly rushed through in response to this morning's incident. I passed my phone to Rebecca, who read the email with increasing indignation. "They're retroactively creating rules to justify her behavior," she said. "This is ridiculous." "And probably not legal," I added. "HOA bylaws can't be changed without proper notice and often a vote." The next morning, I was reviewing the Pinewood Estates HOA charter at my office when my deputy, Mark Jenkins, knocked on my door. "Boss, you might want to see this," he said, placing a printout on my desk. It was the latest Pinewood Estates newsletter, hot off the presses and already distributed to every home in the community. On the front page was a blurry but recognizable photo of Olivia at the mailboxes, her face partially visible despite a half-hearted attempt to blur it. The headline read, "Dress Code Enforcement Begins. Board Cracks Down on Inappropriate Attire." The article didn't name Olivia, but described a teenage resident caught violating community standards, and warned that fines would be issued for future infractions. Patricia was quoted extensively about her commitment to maintaining the character and property values of our exclusive community. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice tight. "My wife brought it home," Mark replied. "We live over on Spruce Circle, remember? She was pretty upset when she recognized your daughter." I was beyond upset, I was furious. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA member anymore. This was a targeted campaign against my family, using my minor daughter's image in a community publication without consent. "Thank you, Mark," I said, folding the newsletter and placing it in my desk drawer. "I need to make some calls." My first call was to Rebecca, who was already fielding messages from concerned neighbors who had recognized Olivia despite the blurring. "This is going too far, Howard," she said. "I've consulted with Linda in my office, who specializes in privacy law. She thinks we have grounds for a cease and desist at minimum." "I'm thinking beyond that," I replied. "I want to look into the HOA's financial records. You think there's something there? I've been sheriff long enough to recognize when someone's on a power trip," I explained. "People like Patricia don't usually stop at enforcing lawn height regulations. I want to know if there's more to her zealousness than just being nosy." "You can't use your position to investigate a personal grievance," Rebecca cautioned, always my ethical compass. "I know the lines," I assured her. "But as a homeowner and dues-paying member of the association, I have a right to request financial records and meeting minutes. If I happen to notice irregularities that warrant official attention, that's a separate matter." After work, I stopped by the home of George Martinez, our neighbor and the HOA treasurer. George was a retired accountant who had always struck me as uncomfortable with Patricia's methods but too conflict-averse to challenge her. "Sheriff Collins," he said nervously when he opened the door. "Is everything okay?" "Just a neighborly visit, George," I said with a reassuring smile. "And please call me Howard. I wanted to talk to you about the HOA finances." George glanced over his shoulder as if worried someone might be listening. "Maybe you should come in." Once seated in his living room with a cup of coffee I didn't want but accepted to put him at ease, I got straight to the point. As a homeowner, I'd like to see the HOA's financial statements for the past 2 years. Bylaws state that these records should be available to any association member upon request. George fidgeted with his glasses. Of course, technically that's true, but Patricia usually handles those requests. She prefers to vet them first. Is there a reason for that? I asked mildly. No, he said quickly. Just her way of doing things. Very organized, our Patricia. I'd rather not involve her given the situation with my daughter, I explained. Since you're the treasurer, you have equal authority to provide these records. George hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind. You know what, you're right, let me get my laptop. The financial statements were illuminating. While most expenses seemed legitimate landscaping contracts, community pool maintenance, seasonal decorations, there were several large payments to a company called Wilkins Property Management for consulting services. This company, I pointed to the entries, any relation to Patricia? George's discomfort was palpable. Her son's company, the board approved it for handling violation inspections and administrative support. I don't recall this being disclosed at any meeting I attended, I noted. It was approved 3 years ago before you moved here, George explained. Patricia recused herself from the vote, technically. And these amounts, $45,000 last year for consulting in a neighborhood with 120 homes. The fees have increased every year, George admitted. Patricia says it's market rate, but he trailed off. But you're not convinced, I finished for him. I'm just the numbers guy, he said defensively. I process the payments that the board approves. I noticed another interesting pattern. The violation fees collected had tripled in the past 2 years, coinciding with Patricia's ascension to vice president. Where do the violation fees go? I asked. Into the general fund, George said. Though lately, Patricia has been pushing for a community enforcement line item in the budget. For cameras and such. Cameras. That explained her obsession with documenting violations with her phone. She was building a case for surveillance equipment that her son's company would likely provide at market rates. George, I appreciate your transparency, I said, standing to leave. I may need to review these documents again. He nodded, looking both relieved and worried. Just. Keep my name out of it, would you? My wife and I want a peaceful retirement. Of course, I assured him. This was just a concerned homeowner reviewing financial statements, nothing more. That night, Rebecca and I sat at our kitchen table after Olivia went to bed, spreading out printouts of the HOA financials. This is textbook conflict of interest, Rebecca said, circling figures on the statements. Patricia failed to properly disclose her family connection to the vendor, the fees are well above market rate, and there's no evidence of competitive bidding. And now she wants to expand into surveillance, I added, using violation fees to fund it. It explains why she's been so aggressive about documenting infractions, Rebecca noted. More violations mean more revenue, which means more budget for her son's company. I leaned back in my chair, thinking. We need to bring this to the board, but Patricia has them wrapped around her finger. Jason Thompson practically rubber stamps everything she proposes. Then we go above the board, Rebecca suggested. Call for a special meeting of all homeowners. The bylaws allow it with signatures from 25% of residents. That's 30 signatures, I calculated. After that newsletter with Olivia's picture, I bet we could get twice that many. The next day was Saturday, and we put our plan into action. Rebecca drafted a petition requesting a special homeowners meeting to address financial transparency concerns and privacy violations by the current board. I made copies, and Olivia volunteered to help us collect signatures. Are you sure you want to be involved? I asked her. Patricia might make things uncomfortable. Olivia straightened her shoulders in a way that reminded me so much of her mother. She already made things uncomfortable, Dad. I'm not going to hide from her. We split up to cover the neighborhood more efficiently. I took the north side, Rebecca the south, and Olivia, paired with her friend Emma, covered the central streets. The response was overwhelming. Nearly every homeowner I approached had a Patricia Wilkins story. The Andersons had been fined for having a basketball hoop visible from the street. The Patels received a violation notice for wind chimes. The elderly Mrs. Gomez had been reduced to tears when Patricia measured her grass with a ruler and found it half an inch too high. By lunchtime, we had 48 signatures, well beyond the required threshold. I was returning home when my radio crackled. It was the department dispatcher. "Sheriff, we've got a disturbance call from Pinewood Estates. 432 Oak Ridge Lane." My heart dropped. That was our address. "Nature of the disturbance?" I asked, already turning my car around. "Caller reports trespassing and solicitation without a permit. Says 2 teenagers are going door to door conducting unauthorized business." Olivia and Emma. I pressed the accelerator. "Diana, who called it in?" "Patricia Wilkins," the dispatcher replied. She was quite insistent that officers respond immediately. "Tell responding units I'm handling it personally," I said, my jaw tight. When I pulled up to our house, Patricia's silver Mercedes was parked out front, and she was standing on our lawn, phone in hand, apparently recording Olivia and Emma, who were on our porch looking confused and upset. I stepped out of my car, not bothering to hide my anger. "Mrs. Wilkins, what do you think you're doing on my property?" Patricia turned, momentarily startled, then recovered her imperious demeanor. "Sheriff, your daughter is violating HOA rules by soliciting door to door without board approval." "I've called the police." "I am the police," I reminded her, "and my daughter is not soliciting. She's exercising her right as a homeowner's dependent to collect signatures for a legitimate HOA petition." "She needs a permit," Patricia insisted, still recording. "And she's wearing that inappropriate hoodie again, in direct violation of our new dress code policy." I stepped between her and my daughter. "Mrs. Wilkins, you are trespassing on my property. Turn off that camera and leave immediately." "This is a public easement," she argued, though she took a step back. "My lawn is not an easement," I corrected her, "and I am instructing you to leave, now." Patricia's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, a patrol car pulled up. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, looking uncomfortable to find his boss in the middle of the situation. "Everything okay, Sheriff?" he asked, approaching cautiously. "Officer Rodriguez, would you please escort Mrs. Wilkins off my property?" I requested formally. "She is trespassing and refusing to leave." Patricia's face flushed bright red. "This is outrageous. I am the HOA vice president, which gives you absolutely no authority to trespass on private property," I replied evenly. "Officer Rodriguez, please make sure Mrs. Wilkins understands that if she returns to my property uninvited, she will be arrested for trespassing." Rodriguez nodded professionally. "Madam, I need you to return to your vehicle now." For a moment, I thought Patricia might refuse, but self-preservation won out. With a final glare, she marched back to her Mercedes, got in, and drove away with a screech of tires. "Sorry about that, Sheriff," Rodriguez said. "Dispatch said it was urgent, not your fault," I assured him. "Thank you for responding." After he left, I turned to Olivia and Emma, who looked shaken but also slightly impressed. "You girls okay?" Olivia nodded. "She just showed up out of nowhere, Dad, started yelling about permits and taking videos." "She's been following us for blocks," Emma added. "Taking pictures of every house where we stopped." My concern deepened. Patricia's behavior was escalating from merely aggressive to potentially stalking. "Let's get inside," I said. "I think we've collected enough signatures for one day." That evening, Rebecca formally submitted our petition for a special meeting, as required by the bylaws. The board would have 14 days to schedule the meeting, which had to take place within 30 days of submission. We expected delays and excuses, but we didn't expect what happened next. Monday morning, I was at my desk reviewing weekend incident reports when my secretary buzzed me. "Sheriff, there's a Mr. Thompson from your HOA here to see you. Says it's urgent." Jason Thompson was the last person I expected to see at the sheriff's office. As HOA president, he'd always maintained a professional distance from me, perhaps uncomfortable with having law enforcement living in his jurisdiction. "Send him in," I said, curious. Jason entered, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his golf shirt and khakis. He was in his 60s, a retired executive who'd taken on the HOA presidency as a way to fill his time. "Sheriff Collins," he began, declining my offer to sit. "I'm here about a serious allegation regarding Patricia Wilkins. That got my attention." "What sort of allegation, after your petition circulated this weekend? I received several concerning emails from homeowners," he explained. One included video footage from a doorbell camera that shows Patricia removing items from a mailbox that doesn't belong to her. My professional instincts kicked in immediately. "That's a federal offense." "When was this?" "Friday afternoon," Jason said. "The Morgans on Elm Street were reviewing their footage after hearing about your petition. They noticed Patricia approaching their mailbox, removing what appears to be their mail, looking through it, and then returning only some items. Mail theft. This was no longer HOA overreach, this was a serious crime." "I'll need that footage," I said, "and I'll need to speak with the Morgans." Jason nodded. "I've encouraged them to contact you directly. Sheriff, I want to be clear, the board had no knowledge of this behavior. We're as shocked as you are." His sincerity seemed genuine, but I wasn't ready to absolve the board entirely. "What about the financial irregularities involving her son's company?" Jason's face fell. "I was not aware of any irregularities. Patricia handled most of the vendor relationships. As president, you approved the payments," I pointed out. "Yes, based on her recommendation that they were the most qualified vendor," he admitted. "I never knew it was her son's company. She presented it as an independent contractor." Either Jason was an extremely negligent president or he was lying. Either way, the HOA had serious governance issues. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," I said. "I'll need to pursue the mail theft allegation officially. It's a federal offense." "Of course," Jason nodded quickly. "The board will cooperate fully. In fact, we've scheduled the special meeting for this Friday evening. We want to address the community's concerns as soon as possible." That was surprisingly accommodating. Perhaps Jason was realizing how exposed the board was and trying to mitigate the damage. After he left, I contacted the postal inspector's office. Mail theft was their jurisdiction, and they took it very seriously. Within an hour, I had forwarded them the video footage Jason had sent over and arranged for an inspector to interview the Morgans. By Wednesday, things had developed rapidly. The postal inspector had obtained a search warrant for Patricia's home based on the video evidence and statements from 3 other families who suspected their mail had been tampered with. They asked for my department's assistance in executing the warrant, given our familiarity with the neighborhood. I recused myself from the actual search due to my personal connection to the case, sending my most experienced deputies instead. The search revealed what I had begun to suspect: Patricia had been systematically monitoring not just the physical appearance of the neighborhood, but the personal lives of its residents. Her home office contained a filing cabinet with folders on every household in Pinewood Estates. Some contained just basic information: names, occupations, vehicle descriptions. Others were more extensive, with copies of mail, printouts of social media posts, and notes about daily routines. My family's folder was particularly thick, with multiple photos of our home, our cars, and even surveillance photos of Olivia at various locations around the neighborhood. Most damning were the dozens of pieces of mail addressed to other residents, carefully organized by address. Bank statements, medical correspondence, college acceptance letters. Patricia had been systematically intercepting important mail, presumably to gather information she could use against her neighbors. The postal inspector arrested Patricia that afternoon on multiple federal charges related to mail theft. As she was led to the inspector's vehicle in handcuffs, neighbors came out of their homes to witness the downfall of Pinewood Estates' most feared resident. I made sure to stay away from the scene, watching from my office via the body cameras my deputies wore. This wasn't about personal satisfaction, it was about justice for everyone Patricia had harassed and violated. Friday's special meeting went ahead as planned, though with a very different tone than we had anticipated. Jason Thompson opened with a somber announcement about Patricia's arrest and an apology to the community. The board failed in its oversight responsibilities, he admitted to the packed community center. We allowed one individual's agenda to override the best interests of our community. For that, I personally apologize, and I tender my resignation as president, effective immediately. 3 other board members followed suit, leaving only George, the treasurer, who had agreed to stay on temporarily to ensure financial continuity while elections were held. Rebecca was unanimously elected to head the transition committee that would audit the HOA's finances and revise the bylaws. The first order of business was terminating the contract with Wilkins Property Management and initiating a review of all fines issued during Patricia's tenure. As the meeting concluded, neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before were making plans for a community picnic. There was a palpable sense of relief in the room. The reign of HOA terror was over. Walking home with Rebecca and Olivia under a starry April sky, I reflected on how quickly things had unraveled for Patricia. Her need to control every aspect of the neighborhood had ultimately been her undoing. "What do you think will happen to her?" Olivia asked as we turned onto our street. "The mail theft charges are serious," I replied honestly. "Federal offenses carry significant penalties, but the legal system will determine the appropriate consequences." "And the HOA?" she pressed. Rebecca smiled. "I think we'll have a very different kind of homeowners association moving forward, one that remembers it exists to serve the community, not control it." As we approached our house, I noticed something that made me smile. Several of our neighbors' porch lights were on blue ones, technically a violation of the old HOA rules that restricted exterior lighting to warm white bulbs only. It was a small act of rebellion, a quiet celebration of freedom from Patricia's tyranny. 6 months later, Pinewood Estates was transformed. The revised HOA bylaws, championed by Rebecca, focused on community enhancement rather than restriction. The violation fee structure was replaced with a community improvement grant program. The surveillance cameras Patricia had lobbied for were installed, but only in common areas and with strict privacy protocols. As for Patricia, she ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple counts of mail theft and received a 3-year suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, and was ordered to perform 1,000 hours of community service. She sold her home and moved to Florida, where I hear she's living in a non-HOA community, perhaps the most fitting consequence of all. Olivia still wears her hoodies to the mailbox, and sometimes, just for fun, she wears her brightest, most colorful ones. It's become a sort of inside joke in our family, a reminder of how one woman's petty power trip led to her downfall. Last week, at the quarterly community meeting, a new resident asked about the hoodie incident they'd heard mentioned. The story has become neighborhood legend, passed down with varying degrees of embellishment. I just smiled and said what I always say. It's a reminder that even the smallest abuses of power have consequences, and that you never know who might be watching when you decide to harass a teenager at the mailbox. The Pinewood Estates sign at our neighborhood entrance used to read "A Premier Controlled Community." Now it simply says, "Welcome home." I think that says everything about how far we've come. As sheriff, I've seen how power can corrupt, even at the smallest levels of authority. Patricia's case is now part of my department's training on community policing, a cautionary tale about the difference between enforcing rules and harassing citizens. But more importantly, as a father, I've taught Olivia a valuable lesson: stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. The system works, however slowly, when people are brave enough to challenge those who abuse their authority. Sometimes, All it takes is a teenager in a hoodie collecting signatures to bring down a neighborhood tyrant. And sometimes, the sheriff's daughter becomes the catalyst for change that an entire community didn't know it needed. Our mailbox now has a small blue ribbon tied to it, our family's private symbol of the day. Patricia Wilkins learned that true authority comes with responsibility, not a rulebook. And every time I collect our mail, I'm reminded that in the grand tradition of American justice, even HOA Karens are accountable to the law.